He whispered 3 words that destroyed me one day before our wedding. What I did shocked everyone. The organ music swells through the cathedral, its rich notes bouncing off stained glass windows that cast rainbow fragments across the polished marble floor. 200 guests rise to their feet in a rustle of silk and whispered anticipation. At the altar, Michael Blackwood adjusts his tie with the confident smile of a man who believes he's about to claim his prize. But Victoria Sinclair isn't thinking about vows or forever as she stands at the back of the church. Her wedding dress, $3,000 of ivory silk that once made her feel like a princess, now feels like a costume for a performance she never auditioned for. The manila envelope trembles in her manicured hands, its sharp edges cutting into her palm like the truth she's about to unleash. Her heart pounds not with bridal nerves, but with the weight of 24 hours that changed everything. The memory hits her like a physical blow. Michael's voice, cold as winter rain, echoing in their bridal suite. "You disgust me." Those 3 words had shattered more than her heart. They'd cracked open the carefully constructed facade of their entire relationship. The photographer raises his camera, ready to capture what he thinks will be a moment of pure joy. Wedding guests crane their necks, some dabbing at their eyes already, moved by what they believe is a fairy tale unfolding. Michael's mother, resplendent in powder blue, beams from the front row. His groomsmen stand at attention, the picture of masculine confidence. None of them know what Tori knows. None of them have seen the documents hidden in her bouquet, evidence that would destroy not just this wedding, but the man they all think they know. The scent of white roses mingles with her fear-induced perspiration. Her breathing sounds deafeningly loud in her own ears, drowning out the wedding march that should be signaling the happiest moment of her life. Instead, it feels like a funeral dirge for the woman she used to be. The woman who would have walked down this aisle in silence, swallowing her pain to preserve everyone else's comfort. From the front pew, her mother Amanda catches her eye and nods with quiet strength. The same woman who had held her at 3 a.m., helping her practice the words that would change everything. Lisa Williams, her maid of honor and the sister of her heart, stands ready at the altar, her lawyer's eyes sharp with protective fury disguised as bridal joy. Tori takes her first step down the aisle, and her lips move silently, rehearsing the speech that will explode like a bomb in this sacred space. Before we begin, there's something everyone needs to know about the man I was about to marry. The words taste like freedom and terror in equal measure. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our Weathered Rose Stories family. Your place in this circle of powerful, heartfelt journeys is waiting for you. These stories of women rising, healing, and reclaiming their strength have inspired thousands to find their own courage. Make sure you hit the bell too, so you'll know the moment a new chapter of resilience and triumph is shared here with you. But to understand how Victoria Sinclair, a woman who built her career helping other women escape toxic relationships, found herself walking down the aisle to expose her own fiancé's dark secrets, we need to go back to the beginning, back to when she thought she had found her happily ever after with a man who seemed too good to be true. Victoria Tori Sinclair had always been the woman other women turned to when their worlds fell apart. As the executive director of Women Rising, a nonprofit dedicated to helping women escape abusive relationships and rebuild their lives, she was a beacon of strength in a world that often tried to dim women's lights. Her corner office on the 15th floor of downtown's renovating district was a sanctuary where broken women came to remember their worth. On any given Tuesday, you might find her sitting across from someone like Maria, a young mother whose boyfriend's jokes had slowly eroded her confidence until she barely recognized herself in the mirror. Tori's voice would be gentle but firm as she guided Maria through the warning signs she'd been trained to ignore. "The thing about emotional abuse," Tori would say, her hazel eyes warm with understanding, "is that it doesn't leave bruises you can see, but the damage to your spirit can be just as devastating as any physical wound. She leaned forward, her hands folded on the mahogany desk that held photos of triumph. Women who had graduated from their programs, started new businesses, left toxic partners, found their voices again. What Maria couldn't see, what none of Tori's clients could see, was the engagement photo sitting on that same desk. The picture that showed Tori radiant in Michael Blackwood's arms, her smile bright enough to power the city. In that photo, Michael's hand rested possessively on her waist, his investment advisor charm turned up to maximum wattage for the camera. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so tragic. The woman who could spot manipulation tactics from across a room, who had written articles about recognizing red flags in relationships, who gave keynote speeches about trusting your instincts, that woman couldn't see the web being woven around her own heart. Michael Blackwood was 47, and exactly what Tori thought she wanted after her previous relationship had ended in spectacular failure 2 years earlier. Where David had been unpredictable and emotionally unavailable, Michael was steady. Where David had been financially irresponsible, Michael managed investment portfolios worth millions. Where David had been afraid of commitment, Michael had proposed after just 8 months of dating. Their engagement party 6 months ago had been a masterclass in Michael's public persona. He'd rented the ballroom at the Marriott downtown, invited everyone who mattered in their respective professional circles, and delivered a speech that left half the room in tears. "When I met Victoria," he'd said, his voice carrying perfectly to the back of the room, "I knew I was looking at my future. Here was a woman who dedicated her life to helping others, who saw the best in everyone, who made me want to be a better man." The applause had been thunderous. Tori's mother had squeezed her hand under the table, whispering, "Finally, honey, you found your person." What no one saw were the micro corrections Michael made throughout the evening. The subtle pressure on her elbow when she talked too long to her former colleague about work. The slight tightening around his eyes when she mentioned wanting to expand Women Rising services. The way he smoothly redirected conversations away from topics that didn't center him as the successful, accomplished man who had rescued the workaholic nonprofit director from her lonely existence. Tori's support system should have seen the signs. Lisa Williams had been her best friend since their sorority days at State, where they'd bonded over late-night study sessions and dreams of changing the world. Now a successful divorce attorney, Lisa had seen enough toxic relationships to recognize them in the wild. But Michael was subtle. His control wrapped in concern, his criticism disguised as care. "I just think you work too much, babe," he'd say when Tori stayed late to counsel a woman in crisis. "You give so much of yourself to these people, you don't have any energy left for us." It sounded like love. It felt like a cage being built, one bar at a time. Tori's mother, Amanda Sinclair, was 68 and had raised her daughter to be independent after her own husband had left when Tori was 15. Amanda was a retired high school English teacher who'd spent her career encouraging young women to find their voices and use them. She should have recognized the slow silencing happening to her own daughter. But Michael was charming to mothers, especially ones who wanted to see their daughters settled and safe. Then there was Mark Reed, the family friend who'd agreed to officiate their wedding. He'd known Tori since she was 12, had watched her grow from a shy bookworm into a powerhouse advocate for women's rights. Mark had buried Tori's father and celebrated her college graduation. He'd been there when she started Women Rising with nothing but passion and a business plan written on her kitchen table. If anyone should have questioned Michael's fitness as a partner, it should have been Mark. But predators like Michael Blackwood are skilled at hiding in plain sight. They know how to charm the gatekeepers, how to present themselves as the answer to everyone's prayers. Michael wasn't some obvious villain twirling his mustache. He was successful, attractive, articulate, and knew exactly what a 45-year-old woman who'd been hurt before needed to hear. The signs were there. scattered like breadcrumbs through their relationship, but they were subtle enough that Tori, the same woman who could identify emotional abuse patterns in a 5-minute conversation with a client, explained them away with the skill of someone who desperately wanted to believe in her own happy ending. Before we continue with Tori's story, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had that gut feeling that something wasn't right in a relationship, but ignored it because everything looked perfect on the surface? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might help another woman trust her instincts. The phone calls Michael took in private, stepping onto the balcony of their shared apartment with his cell pressed to his ear, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. When Tori asked about them, he'd smile and ruffle her hair like she was a curious child. Just work stuff, babe. Boring financial advisor drama, nothing you need to worry your pretty head about. The way he'd started managing their social calendar, gradually isolating her from friends he deemed negative influences. Lisa was too cynical about men because of her divorce practice. Her colleague Janet was obviously jealous of Tori's engagement. Her yoga instructor Priya was filling her head with new age nonsense about meditation and inner wisdom. The subtle put-downs disguised as helpful suggestions. Maybe you should consider a different lipstick color, honey. That red is a bit harsh for someone your age. I love how passionate you are about your work, but maybe tone it down a little at dinner parties. Not everyone needs to hear about domestic violence statistics with their appetizers. Are you sure that dress isn't a little tight? I just want you to feel confident. Each comment was a tiny pinprick, too small to cause outrage, easy to dismiss as care and concern. But together they formed a pattern of erosion that left Tori constantly second-guessing herself, constantly seeking Michael's approval for choices she'd made independently for decades. The control over their wedding planning had been the most obvious red flag, but Tori had been so grateful to have a partner who wanted to be involved that she'd missed the way his involvement had gradually become domination. He'd dismissed her dream of a small, intimate ceremony in her mother's garden as not sophisticated enough for our circles. He'd vetoed her choice of flowers as too provincial and her preference for a string quartet as outdated. When she'd suggested they write their own vows, something personal and meaningful, Michael had laughed. "Trust me, sweetheart, traditional vows exist for a reason. Let's not get too creative and risk embarrassing ourselves." The dismissal of her voice, her preferences, her very personality, all wrapped up in the language of protection and sophistication. But perhaps the most insidious part of Michael's manipulation was how he'd undermined her professional confidence. Tori had built Women Rising from nothing, had seen it grow from a one-woman operation run out of her apartment to a respected organization with a staff of 12 and a client base of hundreds. She'd spoken at conferences, been featured in magazines, had received awards for her advocacy work. Yet somehow, under Michael's influence, she'd started to doubt her own expertise. When she'd share stories about her clients, he'd nod with condescending patience. "It's sweet how much you care, Tori, but don't you think some of these women just need to take personal responsibility for their choices? You can't save everyone, especially people who don't want to be saved." The comment was poison wrapped in concern, designed to make her question the very foundation of her life's work. And slowly, insidiously, it had started to work. Tori found herself hesitating before offering advice to clients, second-guessing her instincts, deferring to Michael's opinion on matters she'd handled expertly for years. Now, as she stood in the church, holding evidence of Michael's crimes, Tori could see the pattern with crystal clarity. The same pattern she'd helped hundreds of women recognize and escape. The same pattern she'd been blind to when it was happening to her. The woman who counseled others about trusting their instincts had systematically ignored her own. The woman who taught others to recognize emotional abuse had become its victim. The woman who built her career on empowering others had allowed herself to be slowly, methodically disempowered, But that woman was about to die in this church, and from her ashes would rise someone Michael Blackwood never saw coming, the real Victoria Sinclair, in all her fierce, unapologetic power. Chapter 2. But none of that history mattered on the night before what should have been the happiest day of Tori's life. The rehearsal dinner at the Riverside Country Club had been picture perfect. Michael had charmed the guests with his speech about finding his soulmate, his hand warm and possessive on her waist as he spoke about their future together. The salmon had been exquisite. The champagne had flowed, and even Lisa had seemed to relax her protective vigilance as she watched Tori glow under the attention. Tori's wedding party had toasted her happiness. Her colleagues from Women Rising had shared stories about her compassion and dedication. Michael's groomsmen had regaled the table with tales of his success and generosity. To every observer, they were the perfect couple, accomplished, attractive, ready to build a beautiful life together. As the evening wound down, Tori felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with nervous excitement. Tomorrow she would walk down the aisle to marry the man who had swept her off her feet, who had promised to love and cherish her for the rest of their lives. The rehearsal had gone smoothly. The weather forecast was perfect, and everything was falling into place exactly as they'd planned. After the dinner, Tori retreated to the bridal suite at the Grand Riverside Hotel, a luxurious room with a 4-poster bed, marble bathroom, and a view of the city lights that sparkled like scattered diamonds. The suite was filled with gifts from the wedding party, flowers from well-wishers, and her wedding dress hanging in the closet like a promise of tomorrow's joy. She dismissed her bridesmaids around 10 o'clock, wanting some quiet time to process the magnitude of what was about to happen. At 45, she'd begun to think this kind of love might never find her again. The failed relationships, the heartbreaks, the nights she'd wondered if she was too independent, too career-focused, too set in her ways to find a true partner. Michael had changed all that. He'd made her feel desirable again, chosen, worthy of the kind of devotion she'd spent years helping other women believe they deserved. When he knocked on her door around 11, her heart leaped with anticipation. She'd carefully chosen a silk nightgown in champagne, not too obvious, but beautiful enough to make him remember this night for the rest of their lives. She'd brushed her hair until it shone, touched up her makeup, spritzed on the perfume he'd bought her for their 6-month anniversary. "Hey, beautiful," Michael said as she opened the door, but something in his voice felt off. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and he moved past her into the room without the usual kiss or embrace. "I wasn't expecting you," Tori said, closing the door behind him, her pulse quickening with excitement. "Isn't it bad luck to see the bride the night before the wedding?" Michael was looking around the room with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not appreciation or desire, but something closer to assessment. His gaze lingered on the wedding dress, the scattered gifts, the champagne chilling in the ice bucket that her mother had thoughtfully arranged. "We need to talk," he said, and the bottom dropped out of Tori's stomach. Those 4 words had ended more relationships than any others in the English language. Tori had heard them countless times in her office, from women whose worlds were about to implode. But this was different. This was Michael, her Michael, and tomorrow was their wedding day. "What's wrong?" she asked, moving toward him, her silk nightgown suddenly feeling ridiculous and exposing. "Did something happen at dinner?" "Your mother seemed upset about the seating arrangement, but sit down, Tori." The command in his voice stopped her cold. This wasn't the gentle, loving tone he'd used at dinner when he'd called her his perfect woman. This was something else entirely, cold, distant, almost clinical. She perched on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap like a child waiting for punishment. "Michael, you're scaring me. What's going on?" He remained standing, looking down at her with an expression that made her feel small and somehow wrong. The romantic lighting that had seemed so perfect moments before now felt harsh and unforgiving. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady and measured. About tomorrow. About our marriage. About what I'm really getting myself into. The words hit her like physical blows. What do you mean, what you're getting yourself into? We've been planning this for months. We've talked about our future, Have we? He interrupted, his eyebrows raised in that condescending way that had become more frequent lately. Or have you talked about your vision of our future while I've just gone along with it to keep the peace? Tori felt the room spinning slightly, as if the champagne she'd barely touched was hitting her all at once. I don't understand. At dinner tonight, you said I was your soulmate. I said what people expected to hear at a rehearsal dinner, Tori. But now, alone, we can be honest with each other. The word honest fell between them like a gauntlet. Tori's professional training kicked in. She recognized the setup, the way he was positioning himself as the truth teller and her as the deluded one. But this was Michael, and tomorrow was supposed to be their wedding day, and nothing about this conversation made sense. Honest about what? She whispered, her throat suddenly dry. Michael walked to the window, his back to her, his hands clasped behind him like a general surveying a battlefield. When he spoke, his voice was measured and cruel in its precision. About what this really is. About what you really are. Tori stood up, the silk nightgown floating around her legs, her heart hammering against her ribs. Michael, please, whatever's bothering you, we can work through it. Pre-wedding nerves are completely normal. He turned around, and the look in his eyes was something she'd never seen before. Not love, not even affection. Something closer to disgust mixed with pity. Pre-wedding nerves? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Tori, I'm not nervous. I'm revolted. The word hung in the air between them like a living thing. Revolted. She felt her legs go weak, felt the beautiful suite with its romantic lighting and wedding gifts tilt sideways. I don't understand, she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she could hear how pathetic they sounded. Don't you? Michael's voice was getting louder now, more confident, as if her obvious pain was energizing him. The way you throw yourself at me, constantly touching, always needing validation. It's pathetic, Tori. You're 45 years old, for God's sake. Act like it. Each word was carefully chosen, precisely aimed to cause maximum damage. Tori had counseled enough abuse victims to recognize the technique. The way abusers could take your deepest insecurities and weaponize them against you. But knowing the technique didn't make it hurt less. The way you are in bed, he continued, his voice taking on a clinical tone that made her skin crawl. Always so eager, so desperate for approval. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to pretend I want you when the truth is, God, Tori, you disgust me. The final blow landed with surgical precision. You disgust me. 3 words that shattered not just her heart, but her fundamental understanding of their entire relationship. 3 words that made her question every moment of intimacy, every whispered endearment, every time he'd touched her with what she'd believed was love. Tori sank back onto the bed, her legs unable to support her weight. The silk nightgown that had made her feel beautiful moments before now felt like a costume for some grotesque performance. The room spun around her as Michael's words echoed in her head. You disgust me. But tomorrow, she started, her voice barely above a whisper. Tomorrow I'll do what I have to do, Michael said, straightening his tie as if they'd just discussed dinner plans. We've got 200 guests coming, deposits paid, your reputation to consider. I'm not going to humiliate you publicly, Tori. I'll go through with the ceremony, but let's be clear about what this marriage really is. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. I suggest you get some sleep. You look tired, and we can't have the bride looking haggard for all those photos, can we? The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid slamming shut. For a long moment, Tori sat in the sudden silence, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. The woman who made her living helping other women recognize emotional abuse had just been subjected to a masterclass in psychological warfare, and she'd been completely defenseless against it. The beautiful bridal suite suddenly felt suffocating. The wedding dress hanging in the closet looked like a funeral shroud. The gifts scattered around the room seemed to mock her with their celebration of a love that apparently existed only in her imagination. She looked at herself in the full-length mirror, the silk nightgown, the carefully styled hair, the makeup she'd applied with such hope just an hour before. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, someone who'd been living in a fantasy while reality prepared to crush her. The tears came then, hot and bitter and full of a shame that threatened to drown her. How could she have been so blind? How could the woman who spent her days teaching others to recognize red flags have missed every single one in her own relationship? She thought about all the signs she'd explained away. Michael's controlling behavior disguised as care, his subtle put-downs wrapped in concern, the way he'd isolated her from friends and made her doubt her own instincts, classic patterns she could identify in a 5-minute conversation with a client, invisible to her when she was the victim. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Tori alternated between rage and despair, between plans to confront Michael publicly and fantasies of simply disappearing before dawn. She replayed every moment of their relationship, seeing it now through the lens of his revelation. How much of it had been real? Any of it? She thought about the guests who would arrive in a few hours, expecting to witness a fairy tale. Her mother, so proud and happy that her daughter had finally found love. Lisa, who'd suppressed her lawyer's instincts because she wanted to believe in Tori's happiness. Mark Reed, who'd agreed to officiate because he'd known Tori since childhood and wanted to celebrate this milestone in her life. How could she face them? How could she walk down that aisle knowing what she now knew? How could she stand at the altar and promise to love, honor, and cherish a man who found her disgusting? But the alternative seemed equally impossible. Calling off the wedding would mean public humiliation, would mean admitting that the woman who helped others escape toxic relationships had walked straight into one herself. The professional embarrassment alone would be devastating. How could her clients trust her judgment if she couldn't even trust her own? As dawn began to creep through the hotel windows, painting the suite in shades of gray and gold, Tori made a decision that would have horrified her just 12 hours earlier. She would go through with the wedding. She would smile for the cameras, say the words, and figure out how to survive a marriage to a man who despised her. It was the decision of a broken woman, a woman who'd lost faith in her own worth and judgment. It was exactly the kind of decision she'd spent years helping other women avoid. But as the morning light grew stronger, something else began to stir in Tori's chest. A small flame of anger that threatened to grow into something much more dangerous. The woman who'd built women rising from nothing wasn't gone. She was just buried under layers of shame and manipulation. And she was starting to fight her way back to the surface. With shaking hands, Tori reached for her phone. If she was going to make it through this day, she couldn't do it alone. She needed her best friend, her sister in all but blood. The woman who'd never once let her down. She needed Lisa. At 6 a.m, with her wedding just hours away, Tori Sinclair placed the call that would begin her journey back to herself. The phone rang once, twice, and then Lisa's sleepy voice filled with immediate alarm. "Tori, what's wrong? It's 6 a.m. on your wedding day." And for the first time in years, Tori told the truth instead of what she thought people wanted to hear. "Lisa," she whispered, her voice cracking with the weight of 24 hours that had changed everything. "I need help." Chapter 3. Within 20 minutes, Lisa Williams was standing outside the bridal suite, still in her pajamas with a to-go cup of coffee and the fierce expression of a woman ready for battle. When Tori opened the door, Lisa took one look at her. Best friend's tear-stained face and red-rimmed eyes, and knew that this wasn't about pre-wedding jitters. "Oh, honey," Lisa whispered, pulling Tori into a hug that smelled like home and safety, and all the things Michael's presence had slowly stripped away. What did he do? The question broke something open in Tori's chest. Not what's wrong or are you okay, but the immediate assumption that someone had done something to her. Lisa's lawyer instincts and 20 years of friendship had cut straight to the heart of the matter. They sat on the bed surrounded by the detritus of what should have been a perfect wedding day. Scattered gifts, wilted flowers, the champagne that had gone flat hours ago. Tori's wedding dress hung in the closet like a ghost, beautiful and haunting and suddenly irrelevant to everything that mattered. "I need to tell you something," Tori began, her voice hoarse from crying, "and I need you to promise not to say, 'I told you so.'" Lisa's expression darkened. "Tori, what happened?" And then like a dam bursting, it all came pouring out. Not just Michael's cruel words from the night before, but months of subtle erosion that Tori had been too proud or too desperate to acknowledge. The controlling behavior disguised as concern. The isolation from friends presented as couple time. The criticism wrapped in love and worry. "He said I disgust him," Tori whispered, the words still feeling like glass in her throat. Not that he was angry or disappointed or having second thoughts. "He said I disgust him, Lisa. The way I touch him, the way I am in bed, the way I need validation. He said it's pathetic." Lisa's coffee cup hit the side table with enough force to slosh coffee onto the white tablecloth. Her face had gone through several shades of anger, settling into the kind of cold fury that made her formidable in courtrooms. That manipulative piece of... Lisa caught herself, took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was steady and professional. "Tori, I need you to hear me. Nothing you just described is about you. This is about him. This is classic emotional abuse, textbook manipulation designed to break down your self-worth right before he traps you in marriage." "But I work with abuse victims every day," Tori said, her voice small and confused. "How could I not see it happening to me?" "Because abusers are experts at finding our blind spots," Lisa replied, reaching for Tori's hands. "They study us, learn what we need to hear, what our insecurities are, how to make us grateful for scraps of affection. And the smartest ones, the dangerous ones like Michael, they're patient. They wait until you're invested, until calling it off feels more painful than staying." Lisa stood up and began pacing the room, her lawyer mind clearly working through possibilities. "Tori, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about the answer. Have there been other things? Things that didn't quite add up, but you explained them away?" Tori's mind went immediately to the phone calls Michael took in private, his mysterious work emergencies that required him to disappear for hours at a time. The way he'd changed the subject whenever she asked about combining their finances after the wedding. His reluctance to introduce her to certain colleagues, particularly the women from his office. "There have been inconsistencies," she admitted slowly. "Things I noticed but didn't want to make a big deal about." "Like what?" "Phone calls he takes privately, always stepping outside or going to another room. When I ask about them, he says it's boring work stuff, but he gets this look, defensive, almost angry that I'm asking." Lisa stopped pacing. "What else?" "Money things. He's always vague about his finances, says he'll handle everything after we're married. And there was this woman, Nicole something, who used to work at his firm. She left about 6 months ago, right around when he proposed, and he gets weird whenever her name comes up." "Nicole who?" "Stone, I think." "Nicole Stone." "She was at his company Christmas party last year, seemed really smart and capable. But when I asked about her later, Michael said she'd been let go for performance issues and that she was bitter and vindictive." Lisa was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "Tori, I think I know Nicole Stone. She came to our firm about 4 months ago looking for employment law advice. She didn't hire us, said she couldn't afford it, but what? She mentioned working for an investment advisor who she said was not what he seemed. I remember thinking there was more to the story, but she clammed up when I pressed for details. A chill ran down Tori's spine. You think she knows something about Michael? I think, Lisa said carefully, that before you make any decisions about today, we need to find out what Nicole Stone knows about your fiancé. The idea was terrifying and necessary in equal measure. For months, Tori had been accepting Michael's explanations, trusting his version of events, believing his characterizations of other people. The thought that there might be another side to the story, a true side, was both liberating and frightening. What if we're wrong? Tori asked. What if I'm just looking for reasons to run because I'm scared of commitment? Lisa sat back down on the bed and took Tori's face in her hands, forcing her to make eye contact. Honey, scared people don't usually wake up their best friends at 6 a.m. on their wedding day to report that their fiancé called them disgusting. Scared people minimize and make excuses. What you're doing right now, this is brave. Within an hour, Lisa had tracked down Nicole Stone's contact information through her professional network. Nicole was working at a smaller investment firm across town, and Lisa's carefully worded phone call had resulted in an agreement to meet at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where Nicole might feel safe talking. The coffee shop was busy with the Saturday morning crowd, the kind of place where serious conversations could hide in plain sight among the laptops and weekend newspapers. Tori had changed into jeans and a sweater, her wedding dress hanging abandoned in the hotel room like a monument to naive optimism. Nicole Stone was already waiting when they arrived, her hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee like it was an anchor. She was younger than Tori had expected, maybe 35, with short blonde hair and intelligent brown eyes that held a wariness that spoke of hard-learned lessons. I wasn't sure you'd actually come, Nicole said as they sat down. When your friend called and mentioned Michael Blackwood, I almost hung up. Why didn't you? Lisa asked gently. Nicole was quiet for a long moment, studying Tori's face with an expression that seemed to be weighing whether she could be trusted. Finally, she spoke. Because I heard he was getting married today, and I couldn't live with myself if I let another woman walk into that situation blind. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Tori felt her heart start to race, her palms growing sweaty despite the air conditioning. What situation? Tori asked, though part of her already knew she didn't want to hear the answer. Nicole reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, the same kind of folder that would, hours later, be hidden in Tori's bouquet as she walked down the aisle. She placed it on the table between them like evidence in a trial. I worked for Michael's firm for 3 years, Nicole began, her voice steady but her hands shaking slightly. I was good at my job, really good. I brought in new clients, managed portfolios successfully, had glowing performance reviews, until I started noticing discrepancies. What kind of discrepancies? Lisa asked, her lawyer instincts taking over. Money going missing from client accounts, small amounts at first, moved around in ways that would be hard to trace unless you knew what to look for. Michael was skimming from his clients, using their investment funds like his personal piggy bank. Tori felt the coffee shop spinning around her. That's impossible. Michael is successful. He has his own money. He doesn't need to. He's successful because he's been stealing, Nicole interrupted gently. The cars, the apartment, the expensive dinners, it's all funded by money that belongs to retired teachers and small business owners who trusted him with their life savings. The folder contained copies of account statements, transfer records, emails between Michael and his business partner discussing how to cover their tracks. Nicole had documented everything with the thoroughness of someone who knew she was building a case. Why didn't you report this? Lisa asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. Nicole's laugh was bitter. I tried. I went to Michael first, thinking maybe there was an explanation. Maybe I was missing something. That's when things got ugly. She opened the folder to reveal a section of printed emails, messages from Michael that started as attempts to discredit her work and escalated to outright threats. He said I was unstable, that I was making false accusations because I was obsessed with him. He suggested to other colleagues that I had been making inappropriate advances and that my accusations were revenge for being rejected. Tori read the emails with growing horror. The language was calculated and cruel, designed to destroy Nicole's credibility and reputation. It was the same tone Michael had used the night before when he'd called her disgusting, clinical, precise, intended to cause maximum damage. But the worst part, Nicole continued, was the harassment. He started showing up places where he knew I'd be, following me home from work, calling at all hours to discuss my allegations. He made it clear that if I reported him, he would destroy my career and my reputation in this city. "So you left," Tori said quietly. "I left because I was scared. Because he had more power and connections than I did. Because I couldn't prove the financial crimes without access to systems I no longer had. And because," she paused, looking directly at Tori, "because I was 28 and single and had no idea how to fight someone like Michael Blackwood." Lisa leaned forward. "But you kept the evidence." "I kept copies of everything, hoping that someday I'd find the courage to use them, or that someone else would come forward. When I heard about the wedding, I thought maybe his new wife would need to know what she was getting into." Tori's about to make the hardest decision of her life. Have you ever been in a situation where staying quiet felt safer, but speaking up was right? Share your story in the comments. Your courage might inspire someone else to find their voice. The revelation hit Tori like a physical blow. Everything she thought she knew about Michael was a lie. The successful career, the financial stability, the respectability, it was all built on theft and intimidation. The man she'd planned to marry in a few hours was a criminal who'd threatened and harassed a young woman for trying to do the right thing. But more than that, Nicole's story illuminated the pattern. The way Michael had slowly isolated Tori from friends who might ask questions. The way he'd made her doubt her own instincts and judgment. The way he'd positioned himself as the authority on what was normal and acceptable in their relationship. "There's something else," Nicole said quietly. "About 6 months ago, around the time he proposed to you, there was another woman. Sarah Chen, a client whose husband had died and left her with a substantial insurance settlement. Michael was managing her portfolio and—" She didn't need to finish. Tori could see it in Nicole's expression, could piece together the timeline that aligned with Michael's. Proposal with his sudden confidence about their future, with his mysterious phone calls and private meetings. "He was stealing from a widow," Tori said, the words feeling like ash in her mouth. And when Sarah started asking questions about her account performance, he convinced her that her grief was affecting her judgment, that she should trust him to handle everything while she focused on healing. The manipulation was so elegant, so perfectly crafted that Tori felt sick. Michael hadn't just stolen Sarah's money, he'd used her grief as a weapon against her, made her doubt her own mental state to cover his crimes. "We have to stop him," Tori said, but even as the words left her mouth, she realized how impossible it seemed. "We have to report this, get justice for his victims." "With what evidence?" Nicole asked sadly. "These are copies, not originals. And I no longer have access to the firm's systems to get current documentation. A good lawyer could argue that I'm a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind." Lisa was studying the documents with the intensity of someone building a case. "Not necessarily. This is enough to start an investigation, especially if we can get some of the victims to come forward. And if Michael is still actively stealing—" She looked up at Tori with an expression that was equal parts sympathy and determination. "Tori, I need to ask you something. and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Are you prepared to be the one who brings him down?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. 3 hours ago, Tori had been planning to walk down the aisle and marry Michael, despite his cruelty, to preserve appearances and avoid public humiliation. Now she was being asked to be the instrument of his destruction. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Lisa said carefully, "that if we're going to stop Michael, we need evidence of his current crimes. And the best way to get that evidence might be to let him think he's gotten away with everything, to let him believe you're still under his control." Nicole leaned forward, understanding immediately. "You want her to go through with the wedding?" "Not the marriage," Lisa clarified quickly, "but the ceremony. Let him think he's won, that his psychological manipulation worked, that you're too broken and desperate to leave him. And then, when he's confident and careless—" "I expose everything," Tori finished, the full scope of what Lisa was suggesting becoming clear. In front of everyone, at the altar. It was audacious and terrifying and potentially devastating to her own reputation. But as Tori looked at Nicole's brave face, thought about Sarah Chen's stolen grief money, considered all the future victims who would trust Michael with their life savings, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. She felt powerful. For the first time since Michael had walked into her bridal suite the night before, Tori Sinclair remembered who she really was. Not the desperate, pathetic woman he'd described, but the fierce advocate who'd built women rising from nothing. The woman who'd helped hundreds of other women find their voices and reclaim their power. The woman who was about to give Michael Blackwood the surprise of his life. "There's one problem," Tori said, her voice stronger than it had been all morning. "If I'm going to expose him publicly, I need proof that will hold up. Not just copies, but current evidence of his crimes." Nicole was quiet for a moment, then reached into her purse again. "I might be able to help with that. I still have contacts at the firm, people who were just as uncomfortable with Michael's behavior, but were too scared to speak up. If we can get them to document what's happening now." "How long would that take?" Lisa asked. Nicole checked her watch. "The wedding is at 4 o'clock, right? If I make some calls now, reach out to people who might still be at the office this morning." She paused, calculation in her eyes. "I might be able to get you what you need by this afternoon." Tori felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "And if we can't? If the evidence isn't strong enough?" Lisa reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Then you still have a choice to make. You can go through with the wedding and spend the rest of your life married to a man who despises you and steals from vulnerable people. Or you can walk away with your dignity intact, even if he never faces justice for his crimes." It wasn't really a choice at all. "Let's do it," Tori said, her voice clear and determined for the first time in 24 hours. "Let's bring him down." As they left the coffee shop, Tori felt something shifting inside her chest. The broken, desperate woman who'd made excuses for Michael's behavior was disappearing, replaced by someone stronger and more authentic. Someone who understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for others, is to refuse to participate in your own destruction. Michael Blackwood had made one crucial mistake in his psychological warfare. He'd assumed that breaking Tori down would make her easier to control, but he'd forgotten that she was a woman who'd built her life on helping others rise from the ashes of their worst moments. And now it was her turn to rise. Chapter 4. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Nicole had delivered on her promise. Through a network of former colleagues who'd been documenting Michael's behavior out of their own fear and legal protection, she'd gathered current evidence of his ongoing crimes. Bank statements showing recent transfers, emails discussing how to hide discrepancies from auditors, and most damning of all, recorded phone conversations where Michael bragged about his ability to manipulate emotional clients into trusting him with decisions they were too fragile to make themselves. The evidence was overwhelming, current, and legally actionable. It was also tucked into a manila envelope that Tori would carry hidden in her bouquet as she walked down the aisle to what everyone believed would be her wedding. But first, she had to get through the next 2 hours of preparation without falling apart. Tori had returned to the bridal suite to find her mother Amanda waiting with a mixture of excitement and concern. Amanda Sinclair was a woman who'd raised her daughter to be independent and strong, but she was also a mother who'd seen Tori's happiness over the past year and wanted desperately for it to be real. "There you are," Amanda said, rising from the chair where she'd been arranging the bridal bouquet. "I was starting to worry. Lisa said you'd gone for coffee, but sweetheart, you should be eating something substantial before the ceremony." Tori looked at her mother, 68 years old, silver-haired, wearing the elegant navy dress she'd chosen for her daughter's wedding day. Amanda had been so proud when Michael proposed, so relieved that Tori had found someone who seemed stable and committed after years of disappointing relationships. How could she explain that in the next 2 hours she was going to destroy that happiness in the most public way possible? "Mom," Tori began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. Amanda's expression shifted from excitement to concern. As a retired teacher, she'd spent decades reading the emotional states of young people, and her daughter's face was telling a story that didn't match the joy of a wedding day. "Tori, what's wrong? You look like you've been crying." The simple question, asked with such love and concern, nearly broke Tori's resolve. For a moment, she considered backing down, going through with the wedding, protecting her mother from the pain of disappointment and public embarrassment. But then she thought about Nicole Stone, alone and scared, driven from her job by a predator. She thought about Sarah Chen, grieving and vulnerable, being systematically robbed by the man she trusted to protect her future. She thought about all the future victims who would fall prey to Michael's charm and manipulation if no one stopped him. "Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole story before you respond." Amanda sat down slowly, her face already preparing for bad news. "Is this about Michael?" For the next 20 minutes, Tori told her mother everything. Michael's cruelty the night before, Nicole's revelations, the evidence of his crimes, and the plan to expose him publicly. She watched her mother's face cycle through disbelief, anger, heartbreak, and finally, a steely determination that reminded Tori exactly where she'd inherited her own strength. When Tori finished, Amanda was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the church where guests were already beginning to arrive. "Your father," Amanda said quietly, "was not a good man." The words hit Tori like a physical blow. Her father had left when she was 15, and her mother had always spoken of him neutrally, if at all. This was the first time Amanda had ever expressed any judgment about him. "What do you mean?" Amanda turned from the window, her expression sad but resolute. "I mean, he was a liar and a cheater, and I knew it for years before he finally left us. I knew about the other women, the money he borrowed without telling me, the way he made me feel crazy for questioning things that didn't add up." Tori felt the room tilt slightly. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I was ashamed. Because I thought staying together was better for you than being raised by a single mother. Because I was 28 years old and terrified of being alone." Amanda's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I stayed quiet to keep the peace, to preserve appearances, to protect what I thought was my family's reputation." She moved closer to Tori, reaching for her daughter's hands. "And I've regretted that choice every single day for the past 30 years. The confession hung between them like a bridge connecting 2 generations of women who'd learned hard lessons about love and silence. "You don't have to make the same mistake I did," Amanda continued. "You don't have to sacrifice your integrity to preserve other people's comfort. What you're planning to do, it's terrifying and it's brave. And it's exactly what I should have done when I had the chance. But the guests, the embarrassment, your reputation will survive just fine, Amanda said firmly. What won't survive is your self-respect if you marry a man who treats you like garbage and steals from vulnerable people. What won't survive is your ability to look at yourself in the mirror and know you chose courage over comfort. The weight of her mother's support settled around Tori like armor. Amanda Sinclair was giving her daughter permission to do what she'd never been brave enough to do herself, to choose truth over appearance, authenticity over convenience. I'm scared, Tori admitted. Good, Amanda replied. Fear means you understand the stakes, but remember, sweetheart, you've been preparing for this moment your whole career. Every woman you've helped find her voice, every client you've empowered to leave an abusive situation, you've been training to be brave enough for this. By 3:30, Tori was dressed in her wedding gown, the evidence hidden in her bouquet like a secret weapon. Lisa had arrived to help with final preparations, and Mark Reed, the officiant, had been quietly briefed on what was about to happen. His initial shock had given way to grim determination. He'd known Tori since childhood and trusted her judgment completely. Are you sure about this? Lisa asked for the 10th time as she adjusted Tori's veil. Once you start down that aisle, there's no taking it back. Tori looked at herself in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the broken, desperate person who'd considered going, through with a sham marriage just to avoid embarrassment. This woman stood tall, her shoulders back, her eyes clear and determined. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, she said. The church bells were chiming 4 o'clock when Tori took her position at the back of the sanctuary. Through the open doors, she could see the guests rising to their feet, 200 people expecting to witness a fairy tale. Michael stood at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, his confidence radiating across the space like a spotlight. He had no idea what was coming. The organ music began, the traditional wedding march that should have signaled the beginning of Tori's new life as Mrs. Michael Blackwood. Instead, it was the soundtrack for his downfall. Tori took her first step down the aisle, her pace deliberate and measured. She wasn't walking like a blushing bride. She was walking like a prosecutor approaching the bench. Each step brought her closer to the moment that would change everything, and she felt a strange calm settling over her. This was what courage felt like. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. Michael's smile was confident and possessive as she approached. His groomsmen stood at attention, proud to be part of what they believed was a celebration of love and commitment. The photographer snapped pictures, capturing what he thought would be cherished memories of the happiest day of Tori's life. But Tori's eyes were focused on something else entirely. The manila envelope nestled among the white roses and baby's breath, containing the evidence that would destroy the man everyone thought they knew. When she reached the altar, Michael extended his hand to help her up the steps. For just a moment their eyes met, and she saw something flicker across his face. A brief shadow of uncertainty, as if some predatory instinct was warning him that his prey had turned dangerous. But it was too late for him to retreat now. Mark Reed opened his officiating book and began the traditional words. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Victoria and Michael in holy matrimony. Tori let him speak for exactly 30 seconds, long enough for the congregation to settle into the rhythm of the ceremony, long enough for Michael to relax into his victory. Then she stepped forward, her voice clear and strong enough to carry to the back of the church. Before we begin, she said, there's something everyone needs to know about the man I was about to marry. The sanctuary fell silent as if someone had flipped a switch. 200 people held their collective breath, sensing that something unprecedented was happening, but not yet understanding what. Michael's face went white, then red, then white again. Tori, what are you doing? She turned to face the congregation, her voice steady and professional. The same tone she'd used to deliver keynote speeches about women's empowerment now applied to her own liberation. 6 months ago, Michael Blackwood proposed to me after forcing his colleague, Nicole Stone, to leave her job for threatening to expose his financial crimes. She pulled the envelope from her bouquet, the papers rustling in the sudden silence. Nicole is here today, and she's brought evidence of Michael's embezzlement from client accounts, his harassment of female employees, and his systematic manipulation of vulnerable people. Gasps echoed through the church. Michael grabbed for the papers, but Tori stepped back, continuing her revelation with the calm precision of someone who'd rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times. Last night, Michael told me I disgusted him, that my need for affection was pathetic, that he could barely stand to touch me. He planned to go through with this wedding anyway, to trap me in a marriage where I would be despised and diminished while he continued to steal from people who trusted him. The congregation erupted. Michael's mother stood up, her face a mask of shock and denial. Some guests were reaching for their phones, others sitting in stunned silence. Michael's groomsmen looked like they'd been slapped. These documents, Tori continued, raising the envelope, contain bank records, email evidence, and recorded conversations proving that Michael has stolen over $200,000 from his clients' accounts, money that belonged to retirees, widows, and working families who trusted him with their life savings. Michael finally found his voice, his face twisted with rage and desperation. "You're insane. This is my wedding day. These are lies, fabricated by a vindictive ex-employee." "Nicole Stone is here," Tori said calmly. "She'll be happy to answer any questions about her fabrications." From the middle of the congregation, Nicole stood up, her presence confirming everything Tori had just revealed. The sight of her, young, professional, clearly credible, sent another wave of shock through the assembled guests. Michael's face was cycling through colors like a broken traffic light. The stress, the public humiliation, the complete destruction of his carefully constructed image, it was overwhelming his system faster than he could process it. "Michael," Tori said, turning back to him with something that might have been pity in her voice, "you made one crucial mistake. You assumed that breaking me down would make me easier to control. But you forgot that I've spent my entire career helping women find their voices. And now I've found mine." She removed her engagement ring, the 3-carat symbol of what she'd thought was love, but now recognized as ownership, and placed it on the altar between them. "I will not marry a thief. I will not marry a man who preys on vulnerable people. And I will not marry someone who finds me disgusting but planned to trap me anyway, for the sake of appearances." The final words hit Michael like physical blows. His face went gray, his breathing became shallow and rapid, and suddenly he was grabbing for the altar rail as his legs gave out beneath him. "I can't," he gasped. "I can't breathe." The panic attack, brought on by the complete collapse of his world and the public exposure of his crimes, sent him crashing to his knees on the altar steps. His best man rushed to help him, but Michael was beyond assistance, physically overwhelmed by the magnitude of his downfall. As chaos erupted around his collapse, someone calling for a paramedic, his mother screaming, guests pulling out phones to call police, Tori stood calm and steady in the eye of the storm she'd created. She looked out at the congregation, at the faces shocked and confused, and some beginning to show admiration for what they'd just witnessed. She saw her mother beaming with fierce pride from the front pew. She saw Lisa giving her a subtle thumbs up. She saw Nicole Stone nodding with respect and gratitude. And for the first time in months, Victoria Sinclair felt like herself again. Without another word, she gathered her skirts and walked down the aisle, not running, not fleeing in shame, but walking with her head high and her dignity intact. Behind her, Michael continued to hyperventilate on the altar steps while his world crumbled around him. She was walking away from a life that would have slowly killed her spirit, walking toward a future where her voice mattered and her worth was non-negotiable. At the back of the church, she paused just long enough to look back at the scene of destruction. The man who'd tried to diminish her now diminished himself. The wedding that would have been her prison now transformed into her liberation. Then Victoria Sinclair walked out into the sunlight. Free. Chapter 5. The aftermath of that Saturday afternoon was swift and decisive. Before the paramedics had finished checking Michael's vitals, 3 guests had already called the police to report the financial crimes Tori had exposed. By evening, detective units were at Michael's apartment with search warrants, and by Monday morning he was under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and multiple counts of harassment. The wedding guests dispersed in a mixture of shock, admiration, and whispered conversations that would fuel dinner party stories for years to come. Some criticized Tori's methods. Couldn't she have handled this privately? Did she really need to humiliate him so publicly? But many more, particularly the women in attendance, approached her afterward with something that looked like awe. "I wish I'd had your courage 20 years ago," whispered Mrs. Patterson, Michael's elderly neighbor, before revealing that she'd always felt uncomfortable around him but couldn't articulate why. Something about the way he looked at women, like we were problems to be managed rather than people to be respected. Nicole Stone became the star witness in the prosecution's case, her documentation and testimony providing the foundation for charges that would eventually send Michael to prison for 8 years. But more than that, she became the face of a movement. Other women from Michael's firm came forward with their own stories of harassment and intimidation, creating a pattern of behavior that made conviction inevitable. The story went viral within days. Nonprofit director exposes fiancé's crimes at wedding altar became a headline that traveled around the world, spawning think pieces about courage, domestic abuse, and the power of speaking truth in the face of personal cost. Tori's inbox flooded with messages from women sharing their own stories of manipulation and emotional abuse, thanking her for showing them what courage looked like. But in the immediate aftermath, as the church emptied and the police took statements and Michael was loaded into an ambulance still hyperventilating from his panic attack, Tori felt something she hadn't experienced in months: peace. She stood in the church parking lot still in her wedding dress, surrounded by her mother and Lisa and Mark Reed, and for the first time in almost a year, she felt like herself. Not the diminished, desperate version of herself that Michael had been carefully crafting, but the real Victoria Sinclair, the woman who'd built an organization from nothing, who'd helped hundreds of women find their voices, who'd never backed down from a fight when someone vulnerable needed protection. "So," Lisa said, grinning despite the chaos around them, "what do you want to do with the rest of your wedding day?" Tori looked at the woman who'd been her sister in everything but blood, who'd helped her investigate and plan and find the courage to choose truth over comfort. She looked at her mother, whose own confession about her father had given Tori permission to be braver than the generation before her. She looked at Mark, who'd agreed to officiate what he thought would be a wedding, but had instead become the witness to a reckoning. "I want to go home," she said. "I want to change out of this dress, order pizza, and remember who I am when no one is trying to convince me I'm someone else." 6 months later, Tori's life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. The media attention following the wedding revelation had initially felt overwhelming, but it had also brought unprecedented support to women rising. Donations poured in from around the country, along with requests for Tori to speak at conferences, universities, and corporate events about recognizing manipulation in relationships. Her TEDx talk, "The Day I Found My Voice," had been viewed over 2 million times. In it, she spoke honestly about how easy it was for experts to miss abuse in their own lives, how manipulation often looked like love, and how speaking truth, even when it was inconvenient or embarrassing, was always better than living a lie. "I spent my career teaching other women to trust their instincts," she said in the talk, standing on the red circle in a simple black dress, her voice clear and strong. But when it came to my own life, I explained away every red flag, rationalized every cruel comment, and convinced myself that love meant accepting less than I deserved. The hardest lesson I've learned is that we can't give others what we won't give ourselves. I couldn't truly empower other women until I empowered myself. The organization had expanded to include a new program specifically focused on financial abuse, the kind of theft and manipulation that Michael had perfected. Nicole Stone had left her job at the investment firm to become the program's director, using her experience to help other women recognize when their financial advisors, partners, or family members were taking advantage of their trust. Tori's personal life had undergone an equally dramatic transformation. She was single, but not lonely. She'd reconnected with friends that Michael had gradually encouraged her to distance herself from. She'd taken up painting again, something she'd loved in college but had abandoned when Michael dismissed it as a waste of time for someone her age. She'd traveled to conferences in cities she'd never visited, building a network of advocates and survivors who'd become a new kind of family. Most importantly, she'd learned to trust herself again. The woman who'd second-guessed her every instinct under Michael's influence had rediscovered the fierce intuition that had guided her successfully for decades. She could spot manipulation from across a room, not just in her clients' stories, but in her own interactions. She'd become her own best advocate. The legal proceedings had been lengthy, but satisfying. Michael was sentenced to 8 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to his victims. Sarah Chen, the widow whose grief money he'd stolen, received every penny back with interest. The other clients who'd been defrauded saw their accounts restored, and Michael's assets, the car, the apartment, the expensive lifestyle funded by other people's retirement savings, were liquidated to pay for his crimes. Nicole Stone's courage in coming forward had inspired 3 other women at the firm to report harassment, leading to a complete overhaul of the company's policies and the departure of several executives who'd enabled Michael's behavior. The firm itself faced civil lawsuits and federal investigation, but the women who'd been victimized finally had their voices heard and their experiences validated. Tori kept the newspaper clipping from Michael's sentencing in her desk drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that silence in the face of abuse protects predators, not victims. A reminder that choosing comfort over courage allows harm to continue. A reminder that sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for others, is to refuse to keep someone else's destructive secrets. On the first anniversary of what would have been her wedding day, Tori received a letter that made everything worthwhile. It was from a young woman named Jessica who'd seen the TEDx talk and recognized similar patterns in her own engagement. Jessica had called off her wedding 3 weeks before the ceremony after discovering her fiancé's gambling addiction and history of emotional abuse. "I kept thinking about you standing at that altar," Jessica wrote, "choosing truth over appearance, choosing your integrity over everyone else's comfort. When I found the betting slips hidden in his car and the angry voicemails he'd left for his ex-girlfriend, I remembered your voice saying that we can't give others what we won't give ourselves. I gave myself honesty, even though it was terrifying. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like." The letter was one of hundreds Tori had received, but it crystallized something important. Her moment of personal liberation had become a catalyst for others. The ripple effects of that Saturday afternoon continued to spread, touching lives she'd never meet, inspiring courage in women she'd never know. That evening, Tori stood in her office at Women Rising, looking at the wall where her awards and photos of successful clients created a mosaic of empowerment and healing. But her eyes were drawn to a new addition, a simple framed photo from the day after the wedding revelation. In it, she stood with her mother and Lisa and Nicole, all of them still exhausted from the emotional intensity of the previous day. but smiling with the kind of joy that comes from choosing authenticity over artifice. It wasn't a wedding photo, but it was a picture of love. The love between women who support each other, who refuse to let each other settle for less than they deserve, who understand that true strength comes from lifting each other up rather than tearing each other down. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Dinner tomorrow? I want to hear about the new speaking engagement in Denver." Another from her mother. "Saw your interview in the Post today. Your father would have been proud. I know I am." And unexpectedly, one from Nicole. "Just wanted you to know. Got a call today from a woman in Phoenix who saw your story online. She's leaving her financial advisor husband after discovering he's been stealing from her business. She said your example gave her courage to choose herself. Thought you'd want to know the ripples are still spreading." Tori smiled, setting down her phone and looking out at the city lights, beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness. Somewhere out there, women were making brave choices, trusting their instincts, refusing to accept treatment that diminished their worth. Some of them were inspired by her story, but more importantly, they were writing their own stories of courage and self-advocacy. The woman who'd almost married a man who despised her had become a beacon for others navigating similar darkness. The wedding that never happened had become the beginning of something much more important than a marriage. It had become the start of a movement. Victoria Sinclair adjusted the simple silver ring she wore on her right hand. Not an engagement ring or a wedding band, but a promise ring she'd bought for herself. A promise to never again silence her voice for someone else's comfort. A promise to trust her instincts and honor her worth. A promise to choose courage over convenience, truth over appearance, authenticity over acceptance. She gathered her things and turned off the office lights, ready to go home to the life she'd built for herself. Imperfect, sometimes lonely, but completely honest. As she locked the door behind her, she thought about all the women who would never have to choose between their integrity and their relationships because they'd learned early to recognize the difference between love and manipulation. That was Michael Blackwood's true legacy, not the lives he'd damaged, but the women who'd been saved from similar damage by hearing about his crimes. Every woman who trusted her instincts because of Tori's story. Every victim who came forward because of Nicole's courage. Every person who chose difficult truth over comfortable lies. They were all part of the victory that had begun at a church altar on a Saturday afternoon. Tori's journey reminds us that it's never too late to choose authenticity over appearance, courage over comfort. If her story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And tell us in the comments, what moment in your life required you to choose between what looked right and what was right? Your story might be exactly what another woman needs to hear today. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience, courage, and the incredible strength that lives within every woman. Until next time, remember, you are worthy of respect, truth, and authentic love. Your voice matters, your instincts are valid, and you deserve relationships that celebrate your strength rather than exploit your vulnerabilities. The story of Victoria Sinclair wasn't just about a wedding that never happened. It was about a woman who found her voice at the exact moment she needed it most, and in doing so, helped countless others find theirs. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is refuse to participate in our own diminishment. Sometimes the most loving choice is the one that looks cruel to people who benefit from our silence. And sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of something much more beautiful and authentic and true.